Reading from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 5, beginning at verse 21. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders, named Jairus, came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet and, trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And when they came to the home of the synagogue, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. And after he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. And at this they were completely astonished. Jesus gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this, and told them to give her something to eat. When you get into the car to go on a long trip, there is usually one person responsible for worrying about staying on schedule. This helpful, often misunderstood person is a compulsive clock watcher. After my in-laws retired, they lived for a time on Lake Bernard, about 45 minutes north of Huntsville. It was exactly 386 kilometers from our driveway to theirs. In the summertime, we would make at least a couple of trips north, and I used to dream of making the journey in under 4 hours. I used to say to Karen, if we packed the van the night before and got on the road by 8 a.m. with a full tank of gas, and the traffic was good, if we hit all the lights just right and drove without stopping, we could be at the lake by noon, have lunch, enjoy the afternoon on the beach. As I saw it, the day wouldn't be wasted traveling. Of course, it never happened. It often started off well enough. For the first hour, we might be ahead of schedule, and I might begin to think that this is the day. But soon all hope was crushed. One of the kids would need to stop for a bathroom break, or Karen would say, "We need to stretch about halfway through," or "Let's get a cheeseburger at Weber's on the way through and walk the dog." Here is the essential and ongoing domestic dispute at our house. Karen is one of these people who insists that half the fun of the journey is what you see along the way, and you have to stop and smell the roses. And Karen married a person who likes to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible and does not care for roses, someone who is quite possibly allergic to roses. Now, the fascination some of us have for schedules is a tad abnormal. But for people whose agendas dominate their lives, nothing is more threatening than an interruption. We understand that our schedules can seem tedious to others, but it is hard for us to think of an interruption as a gift from God. It is likely that among the 12 disciples there was at least one who preferred to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible without care for smelling the roses. He was the self-appointed clock watcher and in charge of Jesus' schedule, and most likely he was frustrated on most days. On this occasion, Jesus is tired. He has just calmed an angry sea, but he has a busy week ahead, beginning with a preaching engagement in his hometown of Nazareth. When they get off the boat, the clock-watching disciple looks at his watch and is confident that they have more than enough time to get to Nazareth. They need to average about 3.5 miles an hour. He figures that they will get there at about 4:15. But not 10 seconds after Jesus steps his foot onto land, the pastor of a local congregation falls at his feet and begs him to come and heal his daughter. Jesus complies. He always does. Jesus has no sooner given in to this interruption when a woman pushes through the crowd and grabs Jesus' coat. Everyone can see how busy Jesus is. If he stops to help this pushy woman, it will not only set a bad precedent, but it may endanger Jairus' daughter. Jesus needs to hurry, or this little girl might die. Now, when we read the story, we sympathize with this woman. Mark says that she has endured much under many physicians. Doctors kept taking her money for unsuccessful remedies. She has lived on a roller coaster of renewed hope and then crushing disappointment as the specialists keep writing out new prescriptions. The Jewish Talmud actually describes 11 different cures for this woman's dis-ease. Some of them were tonics that may have actually worked for a few, but many were superstitious remedies. One remedy was to drink a goblet of wine containing a powder compounded of rubber, alum, and garden crocus. Another was to carry an ostrich egg in a linen bag through the summer. Even with these creative remedies, she didn't get better. In fact, with the doctor's help, she only got worse. It is not surprising that when Luke, a physician, tells this same story, he chooses not to mention the role of the medical profession. Millions of dollars are spent each year on quack medical cures. The rumor of some new experimental treatment, some herbal remedy, some peach pit, spreads like wildfire through the ranks of frightened, hurting people. This desperate woman has heard rumors about a prophet who heals the hurting, so she quietly but urgently stalks Jesus through the crowd, pressing her way through She reaches out and grabs the hem of his coat. Jesus asks, "Who touched me?" The disciples think this is a strange question to ask in the midst of a crowd. The woman is terrified. But instead of condemnation, she hears congratulations. "Daughter, your faith has made you well." The disciples want Jesus to get a move on. How are they ever going to get back on schedule if Jesus gives in to every interruption? If they let one more hysterical father or pushy woman elbow their way into their path, they will never get to Nazareth in time. The crowd might have been impressed with Jesus' willingness to be interrupted by this sick woman, were it not in doing so, Jesus loses Jairus' daughter. The servants don't mince any words. "Don't bother coming now. The girl is dead." When they finally get to Jairus' house, the professional mourners are crying loudly. Jesus takes father, mother, and 3 disciples inside. "Get up, little girl." Our clock watcher is outside thinking, if we leave in 5 minutes and drive straight through, we might just make it to Nazareth in under 4 hours. And then Jesus announces, "We're staying for dinner." And the disciple takes off his watch and puts it in his pocket. We all have agendas. Some of us wouldn't know how to get through the day without a list of things to do. We know what we will accomplish if nobody gets in our way. But if we are at all fortunate, people keep interrupting. We have to constantly decide if our time will be spent on what we planned or on the interruptions that threaten those plans. So before we say, "I don't have time for that," we need to slow down enough to make sure we don't turn down chances for doing good, for that which is less worthy. We plan our lives so carefully, and interruptions can be so disconcerting that it is hard to admit that if we're going to serve God, we have to be willing to be bothered. Do you remember John Lennon singing, "Life is what happens when you're busy making other plans"? The disciples may have wondered, how is Jesus going to teach us anything if he gives in to every interruption? But Jairus and the woman are the teaching. The interruptions are the ministry of Christ. Parents know that it is often when we have the least time that our children most need our attention. And it is on your day off when your child is most likely to say, "You know, I really don't want to play right now. Thanks anyway." Children refuse to allow us to schedule good parenting. The most important moments in our friendships are often the interruptions. In the course of the best friendships, the times that matter most are tragedies for which we cannot prepare, and the moments of sheer joy that we cannot plan. When teachers look back on their career, do they remember the days when everything went smoothly? More likely, they remember the interruption of a frustrated student asking for help and working patiently through the problem. Helen Goodman writes, "I have never been especially impressed by the heroics of people convinced that they are going to change the world. I am more awed by the heroism of those who are willing to struggle to make one small difference after another." In his memoir, Telling Secrets, Frederick Buechner writes of one of these holy interruptions. He was attending a dinner party organized by his mother. He writes, "We were just about to begin when a friend of mine telephoned to say that his family had been in an awful accident and to ask if I would come and wait with him at the airport where he was to catch a plane to where the accident had happened." My mother was furious. She said I was a fool to think of ruining our evening together for such a ridiculous reason as that, and for a moment I was horrified to find myself thinking that maybe she was right. Then, the next moment, I saw more clearly than I ever had before that it is on just such outwardly trivial decisions as this, should I go or should I stay, that human souls are saved or lost. Sometimes we get interrupted by the feeling that we need to drop what we thought was important in favor of what truly matters. Maybe, just maybe, those interruptions are not to be avoided, but embraced. They are holy moments to which God is calling us to respond.